Genre debates have always been a really massive staple in the metal community. People love to butt heads over what genre is better, what band is better, what style is better, what movement is better, and no one hates a metalhead like another metalhead. But a while back, I did a poll over on my community tab, which you guys can check in there occasionally because I do a lot of polls that do influence videos on this channel, and I want to do more of those, where I asked you guys a very simple question. Which genre do you prefer, death metal or black metal, and why? And I think in terms of what played the largest role in this poll, it was what you grew up with or what your preferences were, because almost 100 votes, and it was pretty much completely split down the middle, almost 50-50. So in this video, I'm going to be going over what my preference is between death metal and black metal, and going over some of your guys' comments. Let's get right into the video. Be sure to like it if you end up enjoying it. And let me know down below which genre and its many subgenres do you prefer, death metal or black metal, and why. I can't wait to hear. Starting off, Vinny Chesney said, 5 to 6 years ago, black metal among a couple other more extreme genres like grind and noise were the I just don't see myself ever getting into it side of metal for me. Fast forward to the past couple of years, black metal is one of my most listened to genres next to hardcore for some reason, laughing out loud. I have more death metal bands I like, but I gotta go with black metal just because of all the albums I loved from it these recent years. And I think this is an amazing place to start with, and it's something I've personally dealt with as well. So many genres that at one point in my metal listening experience I just didn't feel much inclined to enjoy or really thought they had any place in my musical repertoire. A lot of genres like grindcore, death grind, gore grind, porno grind, black metal, and very harsh genres of death metal like brutal death metal, and even sometimes slam death metal were all genres that sort of crept into my music listening experience until they just became mainstay things. And I think that's what happens to a lot of people, and what I have heard a lot is when you get into metal, you slowly start to look for what's heavier and what's more extreme and what's more abrasive, and you look for things that push the envelope further than what you are used to and what you're just overall accustomed to. And I think Vinny points out something good here. You could have a favorite genre without it being the genre that has the most albums that you enjoy. If you have a small group of albums that really affected you personally, that can be your favorite genre as well, and there's nothing wrong with that. Psychosis says, death metal. It was the first extreme metal genre I got into, and it just has better everything to me. Better riffs, better production, it's heavier, the vocals are heavier, and there's so much variety in death metal that I'm always satisfied. Also, a really good comment here. I do agree that tit for tat, death metal tends to have better production overall, and I think death metal is better at paying homage to the old school production technique of gritty, heavy, bassy production, layered production, without becoming too cumbersome and without becoming so enveloped in its own miasma of sounding overly produced. Now, of course, it depends on what genre you go into, because tech death is notorious for having very mechanical sounding drums and very, mechanical sounding guitar work and very cleanly produced records, which to each his own. But I can understand why you would think that production is better in death metal, because for the most part it genuinely is, but it is a preference thing, because black metal's production sort of adds to what it is and adds to its flavor. And I would also say better riffs is also something that is an interesting discussion to have, because I think it depends on what you look for in a riff. If you like heavier, chunkier, more distorted, tremolo-picked sort of riffs, death metal is definitely going to be what you enjoy more. But if you like things that are maybe more sharp and brittle, at times very atmospheric, very emotionally evocative, black metal is going to be where you need to go, because you're not going to get as much of that from the classics of death metal, which try to sound a little bit more gruesome and vile and distorted, heavy, just hectic, and black metal kind of likes to be more atmospheric and paced and sometimes a little rudimentary. And that's not to say that black metal riffs aren't intelligent or anything. Obviously, that's not the case at all. And death metal has had its fair share of running its tracks in the mud when it comes to similar riff ideas nowadays, especially with the old school worshippers. But I think that on average, you hear a lot more black metal riffs that sort of stick to the 90s pretty closely. Because for every death metal band that's worshiping bands like Autopsy and Possessed and Death and Morbid Angel, Cannibal Corpse, you have a ton of bands bands that try to mimic the Norwegian scene and mimic bands like Burzum and Darkthrone and Mayhem. Moving on from there, Fabian Sanchez says, man, honestly for me, black metal, because I think the atmosphere of black metal and the imagery just makes for something more interesting, especially in fusion with other styles, which is honestly how I prefer both of these subgenres. I agree with that. I think just on average, black metal and death metal that are merged with other genres are just always usually better than the genres by themselves, and I think that's the beauty of how progressive and forward-thinking a lot of genres in the metal sphere in general as a whole have become, where you get these bands that are sort of taking influence and taking these different influences from so many different lanes that you come out the other side sounding so much more interesting and flavorful and intriguing, and setting the groundwork for scenes and subgenres that make a lasting impact for years and decades to come. And yeah, I do agree, the sort of lore, the imagery, the background of black metal combined with atmosphere. Atmospheric black metal is one of my favorite subgenres, so it's hard to argue with that. Squid Metal says death metal, always liked its more violent lyrics, insane riffs, and vocals. So another person saying that just the riffs and the vocals is what makes them like death metal more. Totally can understand that. This is the first person that's really bringing lyrics into it, and yeah, if you want some very heinous, obscene lyrics, death metal is your place to go. Any host of Cannibal Corpse records can tell you that much. And while black metal certainly has its flavor of those types of lyrics, they're definitely a lot more tame, generally speaking, than what you get from death metal. I mean, hell, Cannibal Corpse literally has tracks like Fucked with a Knife and I Come Blood. It's pretty hard to battle those. Emma says, I like death metal, but I definitely prefer black metal, mostly DSBM. My favorite metal subgenre will always be doom, though. I can see why you would like DSBM if you like doom, because depressing suicidal black metal, if you're unfamiliar with it, is a micro subgenre of black metal that is infused with funeral doom metal to create an atmosphere that is extremely slow-paced and very wrapped around the idea of anxiety, depression, self-loathing, and a lot of suicidal ideation, and just it is exactly what it sounds like, but it does help a lot of people. And this is another person that's basically saying they like death metal, but they just prefer black metal. So it seems like there is a lot of overlap, but one just edges the other out usually. Hopium Gardener says, as much as I enjoy death metal, starting off with that again, I feel black metal isn't as restrained and can go further than what death metal does in terms of experimentation. I'm not saying death metal can't be experimental, far from it. It's just when people listen to death metal, they usually expect the typical brutal, etc. But with black metal, you're not constrained to the typical formula. Dear Lord, sorry for the paragraph. Don't apologize, because you hit the nail on the head with how I feel about it. I'm not really going to spoil my preference until the end of the video, but I will say I do wholeheartedly 100% agree with your sentiments here. Black metal just isn't as restrained, and when I step into a modern death metal record that seems like it's more so paying homage to the past, and it has a brutal cover, and it's from a label like, say, Season of Mist, or Profound Lore Records, or Metal Blade Records, you're expecting it. You are expecting what sound you're going to get, and those expectations can't necessarily, they don't have to be a bad thing, because you're looking forward to something that you are familiar with, so it doesn't have to be a poorly received thing. But by the same token, it is kind of cool to have a genre like black metal where you never quite know what you're going to get, and the album cover or the song titles, they can be completely, like, they can throw you off base completely, and you can get everything from a Portal record, which has a lot of black metal influence, but generally speaking is tech death, but has those black metal influences, to bands like Motionless in White in the metalcore genre, where you have Chris Motionless using a ton of black metal influence in his shrieks and his vocals, and then a really lo-fi band like Paysage d'Hiver, and it's like, where does it start? Where does it end? I don't think you can necessarily say the same for death metal most of the time, and bands that are even in the subgenres like tech death and melodic death metal, you can kind of assume what you're going to be served if you step into a mellow death or a tech death record, whereas with black metal, I think it's a lot more of a free reign sort of field. Right, Chalupa King says, chose death metal because I like deathcore, but black gaze is a sick black metal subgenre. Fair. Deathcore is... Subgenres definitely play the most role in this question because you have to take into account the genres that were influenced by the father genre, and deathcore is one of my favorite genres as well, subgenres, so I can understand why you would pick that. Black gaze is also amazing. I love atmospheric black metal, and while I think that bands like Death Heaven and Alcest have kind of fallen off a little bit, I agree. So on to me, though. I think that you guys left a bunch of great comments about this, and I think I agree with all of you in different ways, because that's the beauty of death metal versus black metal, is there is no such thing as a right or wrong answer. There is no right or wrong way to like either of these genres, and one isn't, by virtue of it existing, better than the other. But my personal preference is I would go with black metal, and this is kind of surprising considering how much I grew with death metal and deathcore, but black metal, sort of like that one comment, it's exactly how I feel. Black metal is more unrestrained. You can get far more from it. The lore, the imagery, the lyricism, the album covers. You can have very hyper, well-produced atmospheric black metal records. You can have extremely lo-fi records. You can have technical black metal records. And it literally is just all over the map. And black metal has been infused with so many different things. Specifically in like the symphonic black metal edge has been given to so many genres and bands that it's very rare for me to find a band that is saying that they have black metal influence, like take Make Them Suffer, for example, which are a deathcore band with a lot of black metal influence. It's difficult for me to find a band that is influenced by black metal that I don't end up falling in love with because of that influence, and I think that does say a lot. Whereas if you take a genre and just throw in distorted hardcore guitars from death metal and brutal death growl vocals, it becomes a lot more cookie cutter. And specifically in recent memory, while you are getting a lot of people paying homage to old school black metal, I think you find far more bands that play in a similar vein to old school death metal that do feel cookie cutter, that do feel very elementary, and don't do anything to progress the genre into a direction where it's more interesting, and it is serving a sound. It is definitely serving a sound, and I love a lot of modern death metal and its many subgenres, but just overall I would say my pick would be black metal. But if you compare history and if you compare lore, they both have fantastic backstories and background to them. But once again, I think you kind of have to give that to black metal just because of how extreme it was. But let me know what your guys' favorite genre and subgenres are down below out of death metal and black metal. I'll do some more genre matchups in the future. This would be a very fun idea. Thank you guys for all of the engagement on the poll. I really appreciate that. And be sure to check the community tab in the future for more polls like this that will determine future videos and get your guys' comments into these videos. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is. My name is Jay Morris, and I'm signing off saying fair play.